Final question here on due diligence. Michael, what due diligence does the seller perform on the buyer? What's typical? Maybe it's sometimes lost in the process that, that reverse due diligence is important as well.
What due diligence does the seller do on the buyer?
Yeah.
I think one of the keys, the most important key is, can they get a transaction done? And the best criteria for that is, have they ever done a transaction? And so if they've never done a transaction, they are very, very, in our minds, very severely handicapped. And so why will this be the first one? But assuming they get through that gate, they've been a serial buyer, they know what they're doing. The key is going to be whether they are taking equity or not. So when you sell to a private equity firm, you're probably going to be selling 80% plus or minus. And so that's a factor. Do you want to be owning shares in a company that they control? And so you want to know their track record, what other buyers, what other sellers say about them. We actually make the phone calls to them. And for the most part, we're being given 5 sellers that, are going to say wonderful things. It's what they're not saying possibly. And so, did they close the transaction based on the original, letter of intent? How long did the due diligence take? How long did they say they were going to take? Were they easy to work with, hard to deal with? And so very often it depends on whether you're going to be taking equity or care financially about that particular buyer. If you're getting 100% cash and leaving the next day, now you're talking about probably the softer issues of, are my employees going to be taken care of? And again, the best thing you can do is go to the last 5 transactions and make those phone calls. And you could either let us do them as the investment banker or do them yourselves.
Simon, can you add to that? Just what diligence would a seller do on a prospective buyer?
Making sure they've got the money, really. And we're doing one at the moment where we're selling to a US private equity, and we do in the UK have different regulations about understanding who the buyer is, and we have to go through anti-money laundering checks. So that's the other area of due diligence that we can. It's difficult to get the buyer really to focus on that, because in the US I don't believe you have that same stricture around that. But if you're acting for a private equity firm in the UK, they've got to know the source of all those funds and they've got to run all those checks on them. So that's another area of due diligence that often comes up at the end and is forgotten about. But otherwise, I agree with Michael on what he said in terms of understanding their ability to transact, and it's all about deliverability.
Yeah.
Bill, final point for this class. Yeah, again, what diligence would you do for your clients as the seller on the prospective buyer?
Yeah, I agree with Michael and Simon, of course. The key thing is, can they get the transaction done? And certainly if they've done a number of transactions somewhat recently, that can be a very good sign. If they're babes in the woods, that might give us pause. They've never done a transaction before. If it's a public company, we can look up the balance sheet. Do they have the cash? Do they have the access to capital? That helps us a lot. If it's a private equity firm, if it's a big firm and they raise money from institutions, usually private equity firms will brag about how much capital they have under management. Well, if they've got $500 million or $1 billion or $2 billion US under management, well, that's a pretty good sign that they can probably get this $50 million transaction done. What we've done on buy side, because sometimes the sellers are asking for information and our buy side clients don't want to provide the financials if it's a closely held company, that's understood. And the way that we've handled that is we've asked the buyer, our client in this case, get a letter from your bank that says that the bank, obviously the bank has seen your financials, you have a line or some sort of credit instrument with that bank, and the bank would be willing to support you in transactions of a certain type, subject to due diligence and all that kind of stuff. And so that shows the seller that this buyer has the finances, is working with a large reputable bank that has stated, pending due diligence and so forth, they would be willing to support the transaction. And that tends to help the seller understand that the buyer is going to be able to affect the transaction.
John, one more thing and I've got many black eyes from this, is overlooking the process that they are going to get the transaction approved. And usually it seems like it's no big deal. We've just experienced one was $500 million privately held company, subject to approval by the board. It seemed pretty easy. Unbeknownst to us, the board had two different factions, and one liked the transaction, one didn't. So that's the type of thing. And HSR filing in some cases will be very different for one buyer than another buyer. And then lastly, sometimes a lot of the strategics are owned by the private equity firm. What does the private equity firm know at that moment in time when you're accepting the LOI? Some are in the loop and the front lines, and others are in the back lines learning it for the first time at the board meeting. So that process, don't look at that as just a standard clause that you don't have to pay attention to.
Great conversation on due diligence, gentlemen. Really appreciate it.